This week, the agenda poured over the province's balance sheet. We analyzed President Obama's ISIS strategy and examined the effectiveness of entrepreneurship. The agenda's Week in Review begins by considering the role of the thin blue line. Watch.
One of the problems about sort of the costing of police services is that it's actually really hard to gauge sort of what exactly a huge swath of officers do in their day and where there might be sort of some inefficiencies or sort of some broader efforts that we could make to improve sort of quality of outcomes. And so what cameras would allow us to do with a proper randomized study, some geek like me can actually then sit down and actually code the behavior of officers and what officers actually do. And I think what cameras will show is that a lot of the things that officers do are things that we probably don't really want to have uniformed members doing, and that by and large uniformed members themselves aren't keen on doing.
Hold off on that, because that discussion is to come. Hang in there, Mike. That discussion is to come. I do want to play some tape at this point, because your service, less than a year ago, officers widely praised for their handling of a situation, and we have some video of that. So let's roll that tape, and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please, Sheldon.
She's resisting.
No, I'm not! What are you doing?
Make sure to hold on to that video. I cannot go into great detail about why, but our domestic policy is very specific, sir. It does not make allowances to just let people go when they've broken the law. Unfortunately, right, she decided to try and resist while I was placing her under arrest. And well, ma'am, I know it may look and appear to be something much more, hold on, let me speak, please. It may look to be much worse than it is, but I can tell you that it is only because she is resisting so violently and flailing around on the ground. I'm doing my best, ma'am, not to hurt that girl. I'm not going to get into a wrestling match, right? A prolonged wrestling match with a young girl, because the longer she fights, the more likely one of the two of us is to get hurt. And while it may appear to be very rough to you, I apologize for you having to see that. But unfortunately, I have the lawful authority to arrest her. I am obligated to arrest her. And I can't tell you why. And I'm really sorry about that, but she deserves some privacy too, as do the victims of her crimes.
Ian Scott, what's your view of what we just saw?
Well, assuming the officer had reasonable grounds to arrest, I think he handled himself in an exemplary way. But, I mean, I think it raises some very interesting issues about police wearable cameras. This was a social media tape, and I saw this at the SIU over and over again, where social media only started filming when an incident was in progress. And often what you got was a clip in the middle of the proceedings, the encounter, which looked, pretty bad. Whereas if you had wearable cameras, you could roll it back, say a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, to the situation where you could have a much greater understanding of why the encounter happened. And you also had very much the perspective of the officer as opposed to a member of the public. So I think, if anything, this helps with respect to the argument that there should be wearable cameras on the police.
Chief, do you agree that that your officer actually seemed, to put Ian Scott's word on the table there, exemplary in the way he handled the situation? Would it be better if he were wearing a camera at the time so you could see what preceded what was captured on film?
Well, first, to keep that in perspective, I had the opportunity to speak to both of the officers that are involved in that exemplary performance of professional duties. And again, there's an example of a citizen, as Ian has properly pointed out, essentially trying to play gotcha with the officers. And yes, he got us. He got us doing our job the way that we're supposed to do our job. Now, would that be enhanced in any way by a lapel camera? Again, we run into many issues in how you wear the camera, what it sees, the direction that it faces. In a struggle like that, what is it going to catch? We don't know. So there's all those dynamics to put into the mix to figure this out. But I have to tell you, that behavior that we saw there is nothing that we don't see in Canadian police services across this nation every single day by the professional men and women that do this job.
The behavior of the
officers
doing
that work.
And the arrestee, I presume, as well. You see a lot of that.
We face that all the time, but there's an example, and we've reviewed every component of that. There's an example of officers doing a great job.
Christian, one of the things that I've read about this in the States, the pilot projects they have in the United States, and one of the things that constantly comes up is the notion of human error. The officer forgets to turn the camera on, right? I mean, these things don't run 24/7. You actually have to flip a switch, I guess, and turn it on. So can they really be all that helpful if, in some circumstances, the officer simply forgets to turn the camera on?
I mean, so these are sort of the parameters. Under what conditions does the camera just only turn on when the officer gets out of the car automatically? Does the officer actually turn the camera on and whatnot? But sort of by and large, I think this is a way of kind of for us to think about how can technology sort of enhance the overall effectiveness of the service that police deliver, and to what extent do individuals have control over that particular technology, both the members and the citizens that have to interact with the technology, because we know that one of the challenges with data is once the data is out there, there's always this risk of data that were not intended to fall into particular hands. And I think one of the challenges that we face and where cameras can be advantageous in the Canadian context is a lot of Canadians watch American police shows, and even if you watch an American police show, if you watch about 5 minutes, you can probably count about 10 constitutional legal violations that happen in those shows. So it is a completely unrealistic portrayal of the police service. And the video that we just saw, I think, represents by and large how Canadian police officers conduct themselves. And it's an opportunity for us to demonstrate this is not an American TV show, and that also Canadian policing culture is somewhat different than policing culture in at least some American municipalities. And so to that extent, this can certainly, I think, document, I think, the probity with which members in uniform conduct themselves.
Stand by. I see Mike is champing at the bit, David, but let me go to Mayor Thompson for one follow-up. If this thing were to happen in a much more widespread way in the province of Ontario, would you want to make sure that you had access to that video, you as the employer of the officers?
The Police Services Board being the employer, really it should not have access to that. It's an operational issue. The Chief of Police has access to that, the SIU, if they're working on that. The board's role is governance, and all of the items that the chief identified, we need to make sure we have good policies in place for our officers, for the chief to implement and write orders against. We need to make sure we're working with our associations to make sure that we're looking out for the best interest of the members of our community and our employees,
But
the
you're
officers.
the funder. You're the funder.
We are, and
So
there is.
you don't want access to that video?
No, that's an operational issue.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
All right, so first of all, Linda, whether you want cameras or not, or whether, they're a good idea or not, they're coming. Like it or not, they're coming. Cost-benefit analysis, who cares? You see what's happening in the States and New Jersey, and like everyone keeps, all we have is Rialto before us. Okay, but what are our cameras about? Are they about accountability and transparency? And in this video where police officers are performing an arrest, public policing in a public space, you tape it, you videotape it, it becomes evidence, it's disclosed, and it shows that we're doing things. And like I say, people can go to bed and say, okay, the cops have a camera on, great. But when Christian's talking exactly what the concerns we have from an organizational perspective is that now, no, we're not using cameras for accountability and transparency. We're going to have them on the police officers and monitor their day-to-day, everything they do to make sure that they're being efficient with their time. And
what's your thought on that?
It's completely contrary to what these things are being sold as, if it's an accountability piece. Are we going to put cameras on police officers so we can just monitor their time and ensure that they're working to the highest efficiencies? Is that what we're going to do with everybody? And I think that is a non-starter for us as an association.
So you are open to a discussion about cameras when there's an interaction with a potential arrestee?
Potential arrestee, public policing. We already know.
But not the rest of the day.
Not the rest of the day. Do I need to have police officers film while they're going to the bathroom, while they're eating a sandwich, or talking bad about their supervisors? Not that we do, but do we need that type of stuff? Is that helping? Is that what this is about? No, and I think that totally dilutes what the cameras and lapel cameras are going to be used for, and the accountability and transparency issue.
This is from Stratfor. George Friedman wrote this. This is your organization, Kamram. He wrote this in a recent essay, your boss. There is a tactic that will succeed. The United States making it clear that while it might aid the pacification in some way, the responsibility is on regional powers. The solution rests in doing as little as possible and forcing regional powers into the fray, then in maintaining the balance of power in this coalition. Hussein, it's not often that you hear somebody recommending a foreign policy approach as do as little as possible.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the right approach?
Actually, we do have voices like that in Washington, and we do hear from them quite a lot. Do as little as possible is pretty popular, especially in the post-Iraq and Afghanistan and financial meltdown era. So it's not that much of a voice in the wilderness. It probably should be more. I don't get it. The United States is a regional power in the Middle East. It's a global power, but it's also a regional power in the Middle East. I think leaving it entirely up to states that we have asserted we are kind of the leader of and the bringer together of it's an odd notion, because it sort of posits that if the United States takes the lead, that will kind of ensure that the policy won't work. I think there's a great deal of mixing apples and oranges here. To say that, for example, there have been 15 years of American efforts, as Professor Walt was quoted just now, 15 years of efforts to do things in the Middle East, most of which have failed. Therefore, this won't work. It just is a kind of non sequitur. This is very different. I mean, you've never seen.
It's not a non sequitur because this is the same.
It is very different.
Regrouping the politics of Iraq.
No, wait. You've never seen 4 or 5, if you like, but certainly 4 Arab states come together with the United States and bomb another Arab state. I mean, that's quite unprecedented in the history of the contemporary Middle East. And, there's a function here. You were very sanguine about ISIL, but you're wrong about it. 2 years ago, if you had said that the successors of Al-Qaeda in Iraq would be ruling Mosul, people, I think, would have laughed at you. There is a narrative force behind this group, and there is a kind of an ideological momentum that really does need to be broken here.
Okay, let me give Barry Posen a chance to respond.
This argues for containment, it doesn't argue for liberation.
Yeah, Barry Posen, could you respond?
I don't disagree with containment.
Hang on, gentlemen, you're both speaking once, and I'm not able to hear. Barry Posen, please respond to what you just heard Hussein Ibish put forward.
Well, I mean, if you look carefully at the stated strategy, it's to destroy ISIL, and the only way to destroy ISIL is to push it out of the areas that it has occupied. And as I understand it, there's 6 or 8 million Sunni Arabs living on both sides of the Syrian and Iraqi borders who are now living under ISIL control. Some of those people actually support ISIL's purposes. Some of them have allied themselves with ISIL. Many of them oppose the Syrian government, and many more of them oppose the present Iraqi government. So the problem is not just beating ISIL's conventional fighting power, their trucks with machine guns and whatnot on them. The problem is establishing governance. The problem is establishing a legitimate, respected security force. Yeah. And this is something that the United States can't do. It's something that the
it can play a major role. The United States can.
Something that the Baghdad government can't do.
The United States can definitely play a major role with its allies in creating. And here's where I think we agree. Now let me find a point of convergence here, if I may, which is it's implicit in what you're saying that the main force that will ultimately bring down ISIL in the areas where they rule is local forces, and I would say local Sunni Arab forces. It's not going to be global ones like the United States, and it won't be groups that are perceived as having sectarian leadership representing a sectarian Iraqi government in Baghdad or al-Assad and his sectarian Alawite-led government in Damascus. It's going to be local Sunni Arabs in the areas of Iraq and Syria that ISIL is currently ruling over. I think we agree on that. The question is, do outsiders have a stake? And can they play a role in making that happen? And I think the answer clearly is yes. The do nothing or do as little as possible idea is just bizarre.
Okay, let's get some wisdom in Toronto here. Let me jumping in here, I want to hear what, because you've both laid out your positions, and now Janice and Kamarang, I want to hear what you have to say on this.
I don't want to disappoint my two friends south of the border, but I don't think there's much disagreement here. There's a lot of rhetoric, but there's not much disagreement.
Well, hang on. One side says don't get involved very much at all. The other side says get involved big time.
Barry said containment is a reasonable strategy. Hussein is actually saying containment because ultimately it's going to be local forces that are going to take on ISIS. And so there's more agreement around certainly what the near-term strategy looks like around this table than there is disagreement. It's not the first time, by the way, that Hussein, as you well know, that our forces have gone engaged in a coalition from the air. They did in 1991. When Saddam invaded Kuwait. What is different, however?
That was the coalition George Bush, the father, put together.
That's right. Here's what's different, and we haven't talked about this. Obama led this coalition from behind. He did not lead it from in front. He was pushed by the United Arab Emirates and by the Saudis I've never heard in all my years in the Middle East apocalyptic language from those members of the Gulf, not Qatar, but from those members of the Gulf.
What kind of language?
It was, the United States is vanishing. The United States is abandoning its allies. The United States is absent. Obama is a catastrophe. The rhetoric and the...
They said this publicly or privately?
Well, they're very, you know,
it was public.
It was public.
Op-eds in the New York Times.
Absolutely, it was public, and it was in all kinds of private conversations as well. So, in some sense, the dynamics are very different here. George Bush assembled that coalition, but he was pushed by Margaret Thatcher. Obama assembled this coalition, but he was pushed by Sunni Arab governments in the Gulf who see this as the last chance that the United States has to reestablish its credibility with Sunnis across the region. Now, that's hard to do, but that's the stakes.
I don't think any one of us disagrees that the United States and global powers, you know, international actors, extra-regional actors don't have a role. They do have a role. The issue is the regional actors, and I think that's what George was saying in his piece, is that, and it's not just Sunni Arabs.
This is George Friedman.
George Friedman, yes, sorry. And so it's not just Sunni Arab actors. There's Turkey in there as well. As I said earlier, Israel has interests. But the one power that everybody's sort of skirting around is Iran. And Iran has interests in Syria. It's not going to give up without a fight. Hezbollah is involved directly in that military conflict. And let's just take this, let's forget about the Shia right now. I just wanted to footnote that. We can talk about it later, but let's talk about the Sunnis. I mean, who are the Sunni allies that we have on the ground in Syria? I'm not talking about the state actors doing the bombing. What is UAE and Saudi Arabia doing in Jordan and everybody else? The same airstrikes. Some of them are supporting actors, many of them, in fact, who are, you know, only X degrees separated from the ideology of IS. And so, to say that you need regional forces, Sunni forces, or even Shia, you have to first take a look at who are your potential allies. The bombing that has continued since the air campaign was started has already created a realignment, and that realignment is a lot of those forces hate IS, but they don't want to join the U.S. coalition to fight IS, because it puts them in a strategic dilemma, and they don't really think a whole lot differently than IS.
Let us, at the risk of inundating you with numbers you already know, we'll share a few here. Here's the 2013-14 actual results against the 2013 budget plan. In other words, what they planned and what really happened. Revenues, okay, this is everything from tax income, everything like that, almost $116 billion. But expenditures, significantly higher, $126+ billion. The projected deficit, once upon a time, was $11.7 billion. They took $1 billion out of the reserve fund, and the actual deficit turned $10.5 billion, turned out to be $10.5 billion. And I want, Avery, as you look at those numbers, to give us your sense about what they say about the state of the province's finances.
Well, what they say is the province did a pretty good job at the end of the year pinching pennies, so they actually brought spending in a little lower than they expected. But at the end of the day, it also tells us that with the economy growing slowly, you don't really make much progress on deficits. In fact, if you go back, although they've beaten the target, actually the target was higher than the previous year's deficit. So we really didn't make any progress. If you look at the plan for the coming year, the plan is actually a $12.5 billion deficit. So higher still. Now, if we beat the plan, which I think we will, we won't see that increase in the deficit. But the bottom line here is when the economy is not growing quickly and the revenues are not rolling in, even with discipline on spending, it's a pretty tough road to hoe. So we need both economic growth to pick up, which I think is about to happen. So I think that's good news. And we also need a several-year plan of very tight spending management.
Martin, as you look at it, let me get you to gauge the sort of financial target from the political target. These targets for balancing the budget and how big the deficit is going to be, are they more financial or are they more political?
Well, it almost seems like a game of whack-a-mole. You make these projections, and then you always come in under. So they tend to under-promise and over-perform. And that's a good thing. So for 5 consecutive years, they've beat their targets. That's better than coming in the other way around. as the federal government did. They promised to balance the budget this year and had to push that back a year because they had overpromised. There tends to be a lot of skepticism about these projections. People think the government is kind of goosing the numbers to make themselves look good. I don't really know what happens in that black box, but my impression is that they tend to follow more or less consensus forecasts among the private sector economists, and they tend to scale it back a little bit so that they don't get caught out. But if the question is there a big game going on here to always make themselves look good, as tempting a conclusion as that is, I think that tends to be the pattern, notwithstanding the fact that, as we've pointed out, the economy has significantly underperformed. And that's not a question of the government overestimating it. Again, the private sector forecasts for the last 3 or 4 years have significantly overestimated how the economy would do. But it wasn't so much projecting how the Ontario economy would do, it was the American economy that surprised everybody by coming in under year after year.
So would you say that the targets that they have laid out for deficit reduction have not been terribly ambitious? Is that a nice way to put it?
I think they would say that, in fact, they have decided that until the economy shows a bit more momentum, they don't want to whack it with anything too severe, lest that hamper growth. So I think there was a recognition here, because we've seen it, certainly if you want to take a case in point, look what's happened in Europe. Try to get the deficit down at a time when you're not getting economic growth, and you get even less economic growth. So it can be self-defeating. So what they've given themselves is a bit of elbow room to say, we'll have this target several years out for a balanced budget. We're just going to stay with that target, but we are going to pace ourselves towards that target conditional on how the economy grows. This has been a slow recovery for Ontario. Ontario has run below the national average now, not only since the recession, but in fact prior to the recession. And as was said, it also ran a bit below multi-year projections that were made by the private sector.
Do bankers, though, when they look at these deficit targets and they make these big announcements saying, hey, we beat the target by $1.2 billion, okay, we used $1 billion from our contingency fund, is that cheating, sort of?
Well, the contingency fund, they didn't actually use it. In fact, it's almost the opposite. They didn't have to use it. So the contingency fund is built in there to say, we're actually thinking that if everything goes right, the deficit will be this. But we're going to add $1 billion to that for margin of error in these forecasts, which often go awry. So in fact, the way I would have put it at the top of the show is, Ontario didn't have to use its $1 billion contingency because it kept spending in line. In fact, it came in under its target for program spending.
So what did they do with that $1 billion?
Well, it just disappears. It was a spending that they didn't have to do. And in fact, it's extra spending that will be, or loss of revenue that would result from an underperforming economy.
Oh, I see.
And they have it built into the next couple of years. So in effect, if the economy actually matches forecasts, they save $1 billion in the current year and the next year. If it beats the forecast, you could be looking potentially at a couple $1 billion of elbow room here.
Christine, I mean, they call it Steeltown, right? They call it Steeltown. Does what's happening at U.S. Steel Canada right now, Hilton Works in Hamilton in particular, have you talked to people who say this is chipping away at Hamilton's sense of itself?
I think that already happened, though. I mean, as you said, employment, what did you say, is 25,000?
25.
Yeah, and now, I mean, U.S. Steel is 2,200, Dofasco, less than that, I think. Yeah. So it's really a shadow of its former self, and it has been for a long time. It's not really, you know, it started well before the financial crisis. I mean, Stelco was in bankruptcy protection before it was bought by U.S. Steel, so this isn't the first time there's been issues at these companies, or especially at Stelco. And so I think, I mean, psychologically, steel is obviously a very important industry to Hamilton, just like the auto industry is to Windsor or other towns in Southern Ontario. But I think economically speaking, it's still important, but it's much less essential to the local economy than it used to be.
People don't know this. The biggest employer in Hamilton right now is not steel, it's healthcare.
That's right.
Healthcare.
So that's a challenge for Hamilton, right? And it's a challenge for cities like Hamilton. So right now the major employers are healthcare, education, social services, and they're all dependent upon government funding or large as. So what Hamilton and other cities like it need to do is to figure out a way by which they can accentuate or multiply commerce. Because when you have commerce, you increase the velocity of money, as I was referring to earlier, you create jobs. and those jobs then create other jobs. That really is a challenge for Hamilton. So,
well, we've seen this movie before, and the movie was called Pittsburgh.
Sure.
The fact is there's no steel made within the city limits of Pittsburgh anymore. And Pittsburgh, I mean, is a beautiful town, right? It's a really beautiful city right now, lots of cultural attractions. You know, Pirates are going to play at least one playoff game, we know that. So, I mean, they're doing well on a lot of fronts. Is the Pittsburgh model an option for Hamilton?
Well, I think, I mean, you mentioned that healthcare is the biggest employer in Hamilton, and that's what Pittsburgh has done, and you might know more about this than I do, but I mean, my sense is that Pittsburgh has done a very good job of embracing that kind of public sector, or I guess in the States it's private sector, but healthcare, education, services, like you said, and that's what has kept Pittsburgh, you know, it's not a robust economy, but it's stayed afloat. It's not Detroit, right? Because they've had that kind of alternate focus as the manufacturing sector declined.
They've also got a lot of money. I mean, they've got the Mellons, right? They've got a lot of old money, rich old money in Pittsburgh that I'm not sure Hamilton has, right?
So I think Christine used the word alternative, and so Pittsburgh has found alternative solutions. It's now ranked as one of the most livable cities in the United States. I love Hamilton, and I live there, and I hope more people migrate to it. But it's got a ways to go before it can claim that that kind of luster.
You're in the market for $500,000, right, for some of these ventures, is that right? Where do you even begin to go to find that kind of money?
So when we actually raise funds, we're raising from typically high net worth individuals, but as well as other institutions. So the BDC is actually also a backer of our fund.
Okay, and how about you?
In terms of where did we find the initial capital?
Where do you get your money?
So I think in Canada, for most startups, the first $1 million of funding is the most difficult by a factor of 100. I was literally walking down the street one day, ran into my neighbor, and he ended up investing and bringing others into the fold as well.
How much would he have invested based on that chance encounter?
$100,000.
Really?
Yeah. I need to go to my mailbox for it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's those kinds of chance encounters that sometimes lead to good results. But you know, when we had traction in the company, when we were seeing success, it became much, much easier to raise even $5 or $12 million than it was that original $500,000.
But I'm guessing you raise more in the U.S. than Canada, or it's easier to raise more in the U.S. than Canada.
Typically for the larger check sizes, when you are a technology company and proving traction, it's easier to raise the large checks in the U.S. than it is in Canada.
Sarah, you find that?
You know, a couple of years ago, I probably would have argued that. I've really seen a lot of activity in Canada as of late, and I think it's a really positive thing. I actually think it is an amazing time to start a business in Canada, specifically in Ontario, and specifically in Toronto at the moment, and in Waterloo. And we're seeing more and more people who are writing checks, and even at an early stage, I think we're seeing a lot of high net worth individuals who are actually coming out of the fold and saying, oh, I can invest. I think, you know, we, especially in the tech ecosystem, I mean, we always sort of have this term, angel investors. And that's maybe not a term that everybody at home would understand, but that's really people who are private individuals who want to put money into a company, right, in exchange for equity.
Well, one of the reasons we wanted to get you guys in here, of course, is because we put the stats off the top. The unemployment rate among young people in this province right now is almost 3 times higher than the general unemployment rate. That's a disaster if you're a young person looking for a job today. And I know, for example, we've had Sheldon Levy, the president of Ryerson, on this program in the past, who has said, the future is not going to be graduate and look for a job. The future is going to be graduate and create your own job through entrepreneurship. And I want to get a better sense of how possible that is to do. So can we get into some discussion about that? What's your view on that?
Sure. So I think there's been a lot of conversation about millennials and how they fit into the workforce and some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, et cetera. I can only speak for our firsthand experience, where we bring on a lot of young people in their first career, both in our support structure to support our users, as well as in engineering. And we've had phenomenal success bringing really talented, competitive, imaginative young people into Wave. And over the last 3 or 4 years, they've become some of our best people in UX design, in project management, all of this kind of stuff. So I'm bullish on these kinds of people coming into the workforce and using their unique skills to sort of better themselves and make a future for themselves. I do think, though, that we are not graduating enough engineers. I mean, if you're coming out of University of Waterloo or U of T and you're an engineer, I mean, your future is paved in gold, practically.
Sarah, what do you see in terms of don't look for a job, make yourself a job?
Well, so I mean, there's two things I want to touch upon. I mean, one, I think there are roles still to be found, and to Kirk's point, I mean, engineering, design. I mean, there's a shortage in so many of these fields where successful startups that have now grown into great Canadian companies are looking to employ people in these various roles, and they just can't find them. And so certainly, I think maybe the education system needs to catch up to sort of, and people need to be looking at where the opportunities are in the marketplace. But secondly, I do think entrepreneurship is a wonderful career choice and one that we need to give more visibility to. And I think university is far too late. Personally, I'd like to see entrepreneurship and design thinking and innovation and teaching creativity at an elementary school level. And I would like to see that program continued through high school. It should be just as much of a viable career choice as being a doctor, being a nurse, being a lawyer, whatever the professions are that we sort of tend to see in our own realms. And hopefully, as we have all of this hype right now around startups and people talking about things, that's increasing the visibility for young people. But I think teaching basic resourcefulness and encouraging people to think outside of the box, to be imaginative, and to depend on themselves is only going to be a good thing, whether or not you start a company.
Well, this is one of the great, I'm glad you put this way, because this hits on one of the great questions I think we've got to consider here today, which is entrepreneurs, Raphael, are born or they are educated?
Right.
Which is it?
Both. And just to not shift the focus, but draw the focus in on another class of entrepreneurship. We've been focusing on tech, startup, graduating engineers, and this question that Sheldon Levy posed, we're going to have to make our jobs when we graduate. I don't think it's that easy. In fact, it's a different focus, which is, look, young workers need experience. They need to find out what they want. I agree that some sort of attempt to show that there are opportunities beyond classically defined professions is a good thing. And that's kind of explains why a lot of sons and daughters of entrepreneurs and small business owners become small business owners themselves, because they've had that experience so young. And if you could draw the experience into those who have not that exposure, it's good. But the question that you posed about, are they made or born? I think it is both. It's exposure, it's your environmental conditions when you're growing up. It's like working part-time at your father's, shop or mother's shop when, you're not at school. You pick up on certain things that later in life help you if you so desire to create your business. But just interestingly enough, in this sort of research that I did on cities and small business and the integral role that small business plays in defining a city, making it vibrant, but also how cities create the conditions to create more small business. We did a study of a particular neighborhood in Toronto in the East End, not far from here. It's Wexford, it's where I grew up. Scarborough, exactly. And they'd set up a BIA, Business Improvement Area, not too long ago when I'd done the study, and just cataloging how many employees does each business employ. And there are about 250 small firms, about 4 or 5 was the average. 4.5. When you calculate the number that these small businesses employed along that stretch of Lawrence Avenue East, it was probably more than what was employed in the Walmart, which was down the street on Eglinton with these big box stores. The collective impact of these small businesses in a community, even if they're not at the innovative edge, but they're providing a local service, is so important. And here's the rub. They hire young people. Because a large firm asks for 5 years experience. Where do you get the 5 years experience? It's a small firm, a young firm that employs young people. And there have been studies done by economists saying that the rate of new entrepreneurial firm creation has gone down, which is one reason why youth are finding it so hard to break into the labor market. They can't get these first jobs in these new firms.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those stories in their entirety. They're on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.